behalf of Edison London Stock Exchange Group and Taylor Wessing, a very warm welcome from our house to yours. The purpose of Edison Open House is to demystify complex science and investment themes and give all investors, both professional and private, the tools you need to make informed investment decisions. We're delighted to launch this series with a global focus on innovation and the healthcare investment trends to watch in 2021. Joined by 35 CEOs, investment banks, sell-side analysts, regulatory specialists, and importantly, hearing from investors, both professional and family offices. It promises to be a great lineup, and it's accessible to all. Together, let's demystify healthcare investing, broaden access to the major scientific advancements of the day, and allow all investors to participate in market gains. Thanks for joining us. Make yourself at home.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bonnie Bain, and I am the Global Head of Healthcare for GlobalData. For those of you unfamiliar with GlobalData, we are a global provider of data, analytics, and insights across a number of industries, ranging from technology and consumer to pharmaceuticals. All of the top 20 pharma companies use our services to support their businesses, and we are the fastest growing provider in our sector. In pharma, we provide unique data sets and analytics to help investors uncover emerging investment signals, including clinical trials, drug and market forecasts, drug scorecards, and market catalysts. For my talk today, we will take a look at some of the key trends that will impact the industry's performance over the next year, and wrap up by looking at growth prospects for pharma. So it's no surprise that our first trend for 2021 is COVID-19. The infection rates for COVID-19 is continuing to grow exponentially, with over 95 million cases worldwide. Tragically, over 2 million people have died, and these numbers are likely an underestimation because the number of confirmed cases and deaths is heavily dependent on the extent of testing and policies in each country. In some ways, the COVID-19 pandemic served as a wake-up call for pharma. It forced the industry to innovate at a speed that has never been seen before, rethink their operations, and adopt new ways of working with customers and regulators. It also significantly changed the way that healthcare is delivered to patients and accelerated the use of emerging technologies in an industry that has historically been risk-averse and resistant to change. As mentioned in the last slide, 2020 proved to be a transformational year in many ways. At the onset of COVID-19, the industry shifted R&D priorities to combat the pandemic, and drugs, particularly vaccines, were developed in record time. In 2021, the key challenge is going to be managing the global rollout and distribution, which so far has been far slower than expected. Some countries, including the US and the UK, have since evolved their rollout strategies in order to give as many people a single dose as possible to provide some level of protection. In the initial stages of rollout, we anticipate that vaccines from Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna will be used in developed markets, while vaccines from Russia and China will see significant use in developing and emerging markets. Later vaccine entrants, such as those from AstraZeneca, J&J, and others, will still play a key role in the pandemic in 2021 and beyond. Now, as we look at therapeutics, these will continue to play an important role in the near term, especially in regions such as the United States, where hospitals continue to be overwhelmed. However, the window of opportunity for bringing a therapeutic to market is rapidly shrinking, especially for those products that are still in early stage development. So the big question on everyone's mind is, when will we return to normal? And to be honest, I'm not sure. It could be later this year or sometime next year. To a certain degree, I believe that this will depend on each individual person's comfort level. Now, to help you better understand what I mean by this, let's take a look at this picture that I have up on the screen. Now, this is a picture from the Boston Red Sox victory parade back in 2013. And in my perspective, we will return to normal when you can comfortably answer yes to each of these questions. So would you be comfortable if this person was your father or grandfather in this crowd? And the second question, would you be comfortable attending a parade or any large gathering if these individuals that I'm pointing to are not immunized or vaccinated? Now, tied to the COVID-19 pandemic is our second trend, which is the spread of misinformation. This is a trend that is not only impacting pharma, but almost every single industry. However, the spread of online misinformation about COVID-19 vaccines can really undermine the industry's efforts to roll out the vaccine. A recent survey by the Pew Research Group found that people who received most of their news about COVID-19 vaccines from social media were more likely to hear about unproven theories than those who received their news from other sources. The third trend is remote patient monitoring. Now, COVID-19 has added a sense of urgency to remote monitoring deployment in terms of propelling emerging industry trends such as patient empowerment, telemedicine, and virtual trials. Based on our recent State of the Biopharmaceutical Industry survey, remote patient monitoring is expected to have the greatest impact on the pharma industry this year. Adoption of remote patient monitoring tools will also continue to increase as we see advances in technologies such as wearables, artificial intelligence, and the deployment of 5G. Based on our research findings, the areas that will benefit the most from remote patient monitoring include telemedicine, followed by decentralized and virtual trials. Now, telemedicine was really pushed into the spotlight by COVID-19, and there has been unprecedented demand as a result of the pandemic. In September 2020, the US Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services reported an increase in Medicare fee-for-service claims for virtual visits from 153,000 per week before the pandemic to 24.5 million in mid-September. And just over the past 2 weeks, New York City Health and Hospitals reported an increase in billable virtual visits from 500 in March 2020 to almost 1 million by mid-January. At the JP Morgan conference last week, PBS also reported that use of telemedicine and virtual services had increased more than 40 times since the pandemic started. And virtual healthcare company Teladoc also reported at JPM last week that it had conducted 10.6 million virtual visits in 2020, more than doubling the number the year before. Now, these increases coincide well with results from a survey that we conducted with US physicians last summer, where less than half of physicians reported using using telemedicine before COVID-19. And these physicians were only using it in a very small fraction of their patients. The percent of physicians using telemedicine increased to about 80% during the pandemic. And the good news is that nearly all these physicians stated they plan to continue using telemedicine after the pandemic subsides. Now, clinical trials are also in the midst of a transformation. Prior to COVID-19, technologies such as remote patient monitoring were available for clinical trials, but its use was limited due to a lack of clear guidance on technology design, implementation, and data integrity. During the height of the pandemic, over 1,300 trials were disrupted, And these delays accelerated the need to identify solutions to ensure trial continuity. Based on the results from a GlobalData survey conducted last summer, remote patient monitoring, and shifting to virtual or decentralized trials were the most common approaches that companies were using to address these disruptions. Now, only about a third of our respondents were using virtual trials before the pandemic. But the good news is that close to 70% are now exploring this new theme as a result of COVID-19. Almost 60% of our respondents expect that virtual trials will be used frequently in the next 1 to 2 years. However, it's important for me to add a note of caution here, because of this number, only 44% of pharma and biotech companies believe that they will be using this frequently during this time. The percentage is significantly higher for CROs, academics, and government agencies. Now, our next trend is immuno-oncology drug development. Now, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, immuno-oncology drug development was our top trend every single year since we started conducting our State of the Biopharmaceutical Industry surveys. So this was the first year that it actually dropped to number 2, replaced by remote patient monitoring. Over the past 5 years, the number of industry-sponsored global phase 2 and 3 trials testing immune checkpoint inhibitors has increased just over 2-fold, and the number of combination trials with these agents has almost tripled during the same time frame. In 2021, we expect a number of immuno-oncology drugs to be launched across the United States, Europe, Japan, and China. Our 7th trend is drug pricing and reimbursement constraints. Now, drug pricing pressures will continue to hinder growth in 2021, and about half of our survey respondents believe that drug pricing and reimbursement constraints will be the greatest negative impacting factor on the industry this year. And this is the highest percentage that we have seen since we started conducting these studies. The pharmaceutical industry remains under increased pressure from governments, particularly in the United States, to curb drug costs. And former President Donald Trump issued several executive orders in late 2020 aimed at lowering prices. And controlling drug prices is also a key issue for President Joe Biden, who has promised to introduce drug pricing reforms that will benefit both public and private payers. Now, the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry as a whole are in the midst of a digital transformation, and advances in technologies are already making waves across the entire spectrum of the healthcare value chain, from the lab to the clinic and beyond, and these trends will continue for the next several years. Artificial intelligence, followed by big data, will continue to trend as the most disruptive emerging technologies in the pharmaceutical sector in 2021. And these technologies have the potential to deliver productivity improvements and efficiencies across the entire value chain, from drug discovery to the way that companies engage with stakeholders and patients. AI drug discovery hit several major milestones in 2020, including the first entirely AI-developed drug making it to the clinic, and identifying an already marketed drug as a potential therapy for COVID-19. In general, the pharmaceutical industry has been very slow to adopt AI technologies, but an increasing number of companies are now partnering with smaller AI startups for their expertise in drug discovery. Other companies we're noticing are actively hiring internally and building expertise in-house in this space, as shown by the chart on the right, which was taken from GlobalData's job analytics platform. The biggest hindrance that the pharma industry is facing with adopting these technologies internally is being able to find qualified and skilled staff. Now, even though AI and big data were viewed as having the biggest impact in 2021, interestingly, these were not where the industry made their biggest investments last year. In fact, investments in these areas dropped more than 10% compared to 2019. And the biggest areas of investment were in social media and cloud computing. And both of these areas saw over a 20% increase in spend in 2020. And we suspect that these increases are likely driven by the need to find alternative avenues to reach out to end users, such as physicians, or to engage patients. As seen in the chart to the right, pharma social media hiring in 2020 far outpaced hiring in any other area. Now, we expect this trend to shift by the end of 2021, with pharma returning to investing in big data and artificial intelligence. Investment in 5G is also expected to more than double during this time, and this makes a lot of sense since optimal use of artificial intelligence and big data will need high-speed networks. Now, let's shift trends a little bit and talk about the future of work. And this is a trend that I'm really excited about. COVID-19 has allowed businesses to implement profound changes to the way we work. From digitizing processes and reshaping supply chain, the pandemic is leaving a lasting legacy on the pharmaceutical industry. COVID-19 rapidly undermined traditional sales and marketing efforts, leading to increased demand for online marketing platforms that allow remote engagement with physicians. This is likely to continue for some time until hospitals and healthcare systems are no longer overwhelmed and it is safe to return for in-person visits. Clinical trial investigators are also increasing use of remote patient monitoring, connected devices, and telemedicine to monitor patients during the pandemic. Again, this trend is likely to continue post-COVID-19 in line with shifts towards virtual trials. Manufacturers are also likely to accelerate the adoption of new technologies in order to mitigate any potential risk to supply chain disruptions due to reduced workforce situations in the future. These include the use of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, digital twins, etc. By analyzing social media posts for leading influencers, we can assess how the future of work is evolving. These word clouds to the right are from GlobalData's digital pharma influencer tool. The top right word cloud shows major keywords associated with this theme, and the bottom right word cloud shows the main companies most commonly mentioned. And as you can see, a lot of these keywords and companies are ones that we've discussed already today. Now, our last trend is sustainability. This was an important theme in 2020, and it will continue to be important for the foreseeable future as the pharmaceutical industry continues to grapple with environmental, social, and governance issues such as the opioid crisis, transparency on drug pricing, price gouging, and kickbacks. Based on our primary research, pharma does not view sustainability as being a key priority, but they really need to. The chart to the right shows the ESG ratings for select biopharmaceutical companies in 2020. And over the course of 2021, we will produce more in-depth assessment looking at governance, social responsibility, and other areas related to sustainability. So what is the industry growth prospect for 2021? So COVID-19 is likely to continue to have an impact on all aspects of the pharma value chain, but the biggest impact will continue to be drug development activities, in particular clinical trials. However, we've seen in 2020 that the pharmaceutical industry is quite resilient, and that we are able to adapt to change at an accelerated pace if needed. So trends such as remote patient monitoring, virtual trials, and adoption of artificial intelligence will allow business continuity and minimize future disruption. Respondents in our December survey also agree with this sentiment, and more than 70% of our respondents are either optimistic or very optimistic about the industry's growth prospects over the next 12 months. So to wrap up, the COVID-19 pandemic caused a seismic shift across the pharma industry, and we are witnessing the impact of trends that were barely considered before now. Pharma will need to adapt quickly to this new world and prepare for a new way of working. And companies that can adapt quickly are primed to succeed in 2021 and beyond. Thank you.